Welcome to Your Money Map, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I'm your host, Jean Chatzky. Very nice to see all of you today, and to know that you are out there and will be contributing to this conversation. On a recent show, I talked about the difference between having a job, a career, and a calling, and the fact that people who feel that what they do each day for work is a calling tend to be happier. They tend to be more engaged, more involved, have a greater sense of overall well being. Well, today we're digging into a very tangential subject. We're going to talk about purpose and what it means to live purposefully. And we're going to do it with Richard Leider. Richard has been here before, a guest on this show before. He's the founder of Inventure, the Purpose Company. It's a firm that was created to guide individuals to live, to work, and to lead on purpose. And he is ranked by Forbes magazine as one of the top 5 most respected coaches out there. He's also a contributing author to many coaching books. And among the companies and organizations whose leaders he has coached are AARP, Ameriprise, Ericsson, Habitat for Humanity, the Mayo Clinic, Jackson Financial, the National Football League. We'll have to ask him about that. ShareCare, United Health Group, and the United States Department of State. Richard, welcome. Thank you so much for coming back to be with us today.
I was really looking forward to this. It's a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me back.
Talk to me a little bit about where we are in the world right now and the place that purpose occupies.
Well, first of all, spoiler alert, your listeners and viewers are getting older, but are they growing older? So what's happening is we've got a longevity revolution, as you know and report on very wisely, and people are getting older, but the question is, are they growing older? And so if they're not it's either grow or die. Mm-hmm. If you're not growing, which is the natural sense of nature and everything else, you're dying in certain ways. So we have a longevity revolution with people getting older by as many as 3, maybe even 4, Gene, as you know, decades. And what that leads to is a whole new phase of life with new decisions, both financially and emotionally and psychologically and everything else. And all of that demands a new mindset. And what we know, and we can talk more deeply about it, is that if you don't have a positive mindset about aging, you don't live as long, you're not as happy, you're not as healthy, et cetera. So the purpose movement, as I call it, is global. It's across industries. It's across purpose is age agnostic. It's younger people, millennials and others, midlife and older. It's not just about retirement age. So what we have is that people say, "Oh, Richard, you hit it just right with all your work on purpose." And I said, "I've been looking at this for a long time, but now its time is here."
Let me just remind everybody, because you said the audience is open to participate, and I would love to encourage participation. If you have questions for Richard about how to find purpose, how to live purposefully, please post them in the chat. We would be happy to weave them into the conversation and happy to answer them. There's some research that came out this week, a Gallup survey that is one of those surveys that they do every year, and it takes the pulse of people, where they are, how they're feeling about life right now. And just to bottom line it, they're not feeling great. How can having purpose or living purposefully change that?
Well, first of all, purpose is not a luxury. Purpose is fundamental. And by that, what I mean is that the science, the surprising science, perhaps to many, is that purpose is fundamental to health, to healing, to happiness, to retirement, and ultimately even to longevity. I did a PBS special on the power of purpose, and it was shown in hundreds of cities, still is being shown actually in certain ways. And part of my research for that was to go to neuroscience labs across the country where they were studying purpose in retirement, purpose in the brain, purpose in a lot of other things. And one time a doctor held up a pill and he said, "Richard, would you buy this pill? It helps with cognitive decline or Alzheimer's. It helps with uh, sleep apnea and macroscopic stroke and would add 7 to 5 years to your life. Would you buy it?" And I went, "Of course, who
Yeah,
wouldn't?"
I'd buy
But
that. Sign me up.
and is it available? And he said, "Yes, and it's free." And he smiled and he said, "It's purpose. It's not just purpose, but with good health and with good finances, et cetera, without purpose, you don't have these same ingredients for a longer, healthier life." And so what we know now is that purpose is not a luxury, but it is fundamental. Now, the question is how to not discover it or find it, Jean, as you know, but how to unlock it, how to bring it out inside. And that's what we're talking about here.
Well, and we're going to go through a process actually that you've developed to help people unlock purpose. But before we do that, define it for us.
Well, purpose is the answer to why. Why do I get up in the morning? Why do I do what I do? And purpose is a verb. It's a path. It's a practice. It's something we do. It's not something we have. So you did a great job introducing me by saying it's about living purposefully. It's not about having a purpose and therefore then check the box. I got that. It's about what do I do day to day, minute to minute, hour to hour to actually live and have that felt sense of purpose. That felt sense meaning it actually is. It feels better, and I feel more alive, and bring more of myself to the world on a day to day basis.
It's what matters, right? And you and
Yeah,
I spoke before having this conversation, and you said in times of uncertainty. And right now, if I look at the world and if I look
yeah,
at the economy, we've got the conflict in Ukraine, we've got inflation, we've got markets that are wild, we've got
right.
hearings on Capitol Hill. I mean, I could just sit here and for our entire show, I think I could list all of the elements of uncertainty that we're experiencing in the country right now. You said in times of uncertainty, what's called on is personal certainty, and that
Right.
purpose fits into that. Can you explain that? And then we will go through unpacking it and
Yeah.
helping unlock purpose.
Yeah, it's a really great and big question. And in times of change, in times of uncertainty like this, and I feel a sense of despair like maybe you do and others, many others do at times, and in spite of it all. And um, when in times of change or when there are triggers or events in our life, of which you've named several and there are many more you said we could talk about, we go higher and we go deeper. When we go higher, we step back and go, what's going on out in this crazy world? And then we go deeper and we look at what's going on with us in our relations in our family. And when we go deeper, what we yearn for are the constants. What doesn't change in times of uncertainty? And that's when we look for a sense of why am I doing this? What's the point of the exercise? What is my purpose? What do I do in these times? And so we dig a little bit deeper into the larger questions. The pandemic raised a lot of existential questions about the end of life, for example. And if I don't live that much longer and the clock's ticking, what do I do now? That kind of thing. My teacher in this early on, and I've had many great mentor teachers, was Viktor Frankl, who was a neurologist, psychiatrist in concentration camps. He lost his whole family and his pregnant wife and his grandparents and everybody. He was liberated and weighed 87 pounds and came back to Vienna, where he was, as I said, a doctor, training other doctors, and he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And he said this, which I think is important, Gene, and that is the ultimate choice, or the ultimate factor in our lives is choice, choosing what matters in these times, and then acting as if we can say yes to life, in spite of everything. So part of it is this mindset that's so hard to define, but this mindset to choose life in spite of everything. And that's in retirement, with retirement, and so many people who choose to retire and then find something's missing. They
Yeah.
have to they have to revisit that sense of what's the point of the exercise.
So let's go through the exercise, right? We like to get tactical.
Yeah,
We like to try to leave people with real solutions on this show, things that they can actually do, things they can follow along. And let me just say to everybody who is watching, try this. And let us know how it's going. You can drop us a line. You can tweet at me. I'm at Jean Chatzky. I'm sure you can get Richard on social media also, and then we can come back and we can follow it up with a part two.
I'd love to do that. Yeah,
There are 6 steps, right, Richard, in
yeah,
unpacking your purpose or setting up your
yeah,
practice.
yeah,
Let's talk about the 6 steps. Let's go
yeah.
through each of them.
It's also, another word for it is reimagining retirement, or reimagining this new, or this next phase of life. And one of the things that I found in interviewing retirees, when I asked them, what is your single biggest challenge in retirement? The question that comes up oftentimes is relevance.
Mm.
Maybe it's not that word, but remaining relevant, remaining with a sense of identity and focusing in the world and things. So the 6 practices of reimagining are, first of all, and it doesn't go actually step by step by step, because you can enter into any of these 6 practices at any point and then go back to others. But number one is reflection. And reflection does not mean to go off to a cave in Nepal and meditate and light a candle or anything. It means to simply step back, like wisdom, and look at the big picture and look at where have you been in the rearview mirror, and where can you go in the windshield. And the windshield is often, or is, bigger than the rearview mirror. So when you reflect, it's not about just where have you been. It's about where you can go. And so, when I look at reflection, people say, what do I reflect on? And I say, well, let's just look at the 3 M's: money, medicine, and meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe you got the money thing handled. Maybe you got the medicine, meaning health, not medicine per se. But what's going to give meaning to your life? Because we all know a lot of people who are unhappily wealthy and healthy, and we know other people who are not so wealthy and healthy who are happy. So what's the distinction? How do we reflect on what we want? So one of the things, just to take the reflection piece just a little bit further, Jane, is that a lot of people find when they retire that they've been living a default life. They've been living somebody else's kind of vision of the good life. And now they want to look at, well, what's my vision, my authentic vision of the good life going forward? Where do I want to live? Who do I want to live with? What do I want to do? And what's my reason for getting up in the morning? So place, people, right work, sort of, and purpose is so reflection is step one. Step two.
Before you leave reflection, and I'm going to ask you this at pretty much every step along the way, because for me, these things become more tangible when I have examples. So you've coached a lot of people through this process. Give me an example of what somebody learned in reflecting.
Well, I mean, the reflection is really just pushing the pause button and looking at, what do you want? One of my colleagues has an answering machine. When you call, and he's not there. It says, at the sound of the tone, please leave your answer to life's 2 eternal questions. What do you want? Or who are you, and what do you want? And so reflection is, who are you and what do you want? And so the what do you want question could be a bucket list. It could be just, what do you want out there? But what I encourage people to do is that's one thing, to say, what do you want? But the second thing is, who do you want to be in this next phase of life? Because relationships are a big deal. And a lot of
Mhm.
what brings us unhappiness in this next phase of life is the whole loneliness epidemic in certain ways. So what people come up with is some sort of sense, and it's hard to give an example because everybody's an experiment of one. Everybody
Right.
gets to decide how, and so, well, that's not me. So, I mean, it could be just your bucket list, which is just fine to start with. And sometimes, by the way, people will say, I'm a retired lawyer, I'm a retired teacher, I'm a retired something. I said, why don't you just take out lawyer and just say I'm retired? And they'll say, oh, no, I want to matter. I want, I don't want to just be nobody. I want to be somebody. And I was somebody, and now I'm not somebody. And so part of the conundrum here is, how do you stay relevant? And reflection helps us to say, what would help you to remain relevant? What would you do, which are the next steps here in the next phase of your life, to remain relevant? Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense, and I think it makes even more sense for people like me who are very caught up in the work that we do every day. And one of
me
the
too.
reasons,
Me too.
one of the reasons that I think retirement is not on my list, right? Or at least full retirement, is because I don't know how I would essentially answer that question, or I don't know what descriptors I would use for myself because I haven't figured it out yet, right? And that's a little scary,
Well, in my interviews with retirees, they'll say, "Oh, I'm so busy. I'm more busy now than I was when I was working full time." And I went, "Well, what are you busy about?"
right?
And they pause and they'll say a lot of things, and I'll say, "That's filling time. What about fulfilling time? What
Mm.
gives you fulfillment? What gives you meaning? What gives you a sense that you're really relevant and engaged?" And oftentimes they haven't figured that out. That's part of the new realities of retirement, is figuring out what brings you both money, medicine, or health, both essentials, both fundamental, as you are expert in, and also meaning. What's going to give you that reason to get up in the morning that makes you really come alive and gives you that spark?
What's number two?
Number two is connection. So we have reflection, connection, and that is, don't go it alone. Isolation is fatal. And so going it alone is an incredibly bad idea. I was on a program recently with Vivek Murthy, who is the Surgeon General, who wrote a book called Together. He was Surgeon General under Obama and Biden, and is now. And he said the biggest epidemic, or one of them, is loneliness.
Yeah.
So many people today are going it alone. They've been successful. They have enough money, or they're doing, but they don't. They haven't figured out that connectivity. So I often, the practice that I teach people is to have a sounding board. So as a retiree, don't go it alone, have a sounding board. And it's not just your spouse or partner, or it's others. And the sounding board has four people on it. Number one is a wise elder, somebody who is an exemplar of retirement that you could say, oh, they did it pretty well. I wonder what I could learn from them. Secondly is a committed listener, somebody who can listen to you and say, to look at all of the nuances of, sure, you got it together financially and health wise, but what is it that's missing for you? And let's talk about that. Third is a wise younger,
Hmm.
somebody who's younger than you that you can talk to that might ask you different questions. And fourth is a purpose partner, somebody who can go together and say, let's check in on a regular basis. Let's talk about this. I don't want to be out there just playing golf or doing the activities on my bucket list. I actually want meaning and meaningful relationships. And I don't want to have to be Mother Teresa or go and volunteer, but I do want to do it usually beyond my own family. I want to do it in a broader sense. I want my life to matter. I want that sense of relevance. So that's connection. Third, we move to third.
Sure,
Third,
we
third,
can do the third.
third is explore. So once you've kind of thought it through and talked to some others and kind of created a structure, then the third thing is to get out and explore things that you've been thinking about. So explore. I know that I was on a program with the founder of TED, Richard Saul Warman, and he said that TED, the TED Talks,
Sure.
were created on curiosity. Millions, maybe billions of people a day watch TED Talks because they're curious about something. So exploration is, what are you curious about? Get outside of your comfort zone and open some doors to new hobbies, new avocations, new vocations, new things that you're curious about. And so exploration is to not just sit back and wait for it to happen, but actually start to move out there in certain ways. And when people do that, there's this sense of like, where have I been? I've been so busy either parenting or working or doing what I did. I didn't have time to explore. Now I have some time to explore, and maybe it's a new place you want to live. Maybe it's a new vocation. The highest percentage of new entrepreneurs in the country is women over 60
I
who are
know, isn't that
explore.
amazing?
It's fabulous, but they're exploring new things they didn't perhaps have the time or the wherewithal to explore now, but it's never too late. And
Isn't
so,
one of the things that I think is so interesting about exploration, and one of the facets of the process that gets discounted in my mind, is that it teaches you what you don't wanna do, right? And I
exactly, it
talk to
does.
my children about that a lot as they
Right,
try jobs in their 20s. I think your 20s are a time to try different things,
right.
um, and it's okay to find out what you don't like.
Yeah. Yeah, when I did the PBS special, I went out to 6 cities to do live events. If you pledged at a certain level, you'd get me to do a live event. And the whole Gene, it was I would walk into the room and there'd be a whole family sitting at a table, grandparent, parent, kids, et cetera. All said, "You're all here. You all saw this special. What do you?" They said, "We're all at an exploration of what's next moment." And I thought I had it all together, the grandparent, but now I'm without a job or I'm retired or and I'm asking the same questions and so we can help each other. We're all here so we can enjoy or we can have a conversation and some practices to figure out how to do this. And so I found that to be very revealing. Yeah.
What's step 4 or number 4? I know they're not
Yeah.
steps. We're not taking them in
No,
order.
no. Step 4 is to choose. Of the explorations, is there one area or one thing, not or one or maybe one or two, that you want to do a deeper dive into? And so, are there things that you would like to make some commitments to and find somebody to maybe mentor you or a place to go to experience this? And so, rather than just keep exploring, uh, maybe if you're exploring a new place to live, maybe you need to go there. Maybe you need to get the newspaper. Maybe you need to talk to the Chamber of Commerce. Maybe you need to do some, but you need to do a deeper dive into just opening the door and close. And I think you made a great point about closing some doors. That's part of it. And
Yeah.
so choosing, and then the fifth step or the next step is repack. And that may be a new term for people, but they know, the term unpack and repack. I wrote a book called Repacking Your Bags, Lighten Your Load for the Good Life. And so repack means to really decide what it is you need to unpack and let go of in order to have time or resources to do what you really want to do. So it starts with stuff. Repacking, people think right away of, oh, I need to clean out my house or get rid of my stuff. And often that's the case. I have people who I advise to start with a drawer and take everything out of that drawer and put them into, yes, need this, don't need this in the next phase of my life, and can't decide, I'll check it out in a year from now. And they'll move from a drawer to a closet and they'll start to look at all those clothes and shoes and bags and everything. And pretty soon I get these emails to this day from people who say, I just sold my house. I started with a drawer and realized I don't really. So you start with stuff, but then you look at your relationships, and say, I don't really need to go to dinner every month with these people anymore. It doesn't have to be harsh, but it has to be clean. You only have so much time. What are the relationships you want to hang on to and repack, and what are the ones you need to unpack? And
Let
then
me
you look at your
let me
one
ask
other.
you about that,
Yeah,
about those relationships, because you say it doesn't need to be harsh and it feels harsh, right?
yeah,
If you are the person who is unpacking a relationship, particularly one that you've had a long time, because you've decided, it doesn't even have to be toxic. It could just be unfulfilling, right?
yeah,
It could just be one of those things that by saying yes to this, you suddenly realize you're saying no to something else that you want more, right? That's a
yeah,
valid reason to do it.
yeah.
How do you how do you justify it to yourself, and how do you justify it to the other person?
With great difficulty. Uh, it often takes a crisis. It takes a breakdown of some sort. It could be cancer. It could be economic. It could be a lot of things that say, I need to make a decision here. I've been living in limbo, and I need to in order for me to get on with this, I need to let go. So there's no easy answer to that question, Gene, for sure. And it's the thing that hangs a lot of us up, the unpacking question. And, maybe even start with a calendar and just say, where are your commitments? I don't want to volunteer here anymore, or I don't want to do this anymore. I need, because it's taking up time that I'm really not committed to. So saying no is a complete sentence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
I
and
love
that's
that.
not, but it's not easy. It's not easy to say no. And sometimes we have to work our way through that. We may need to get help with that. But, to belong and to matter are the answers to the answering machine question. Who are you and what do you want? The answering machine question I asked, I talked about earlier. And, if when you look at the who are you and what do you want, if it's not working, I mean, at some point it may take a crisis or not. I'm not sure.
We got a comment from Suzanne that somebody she knows refers to unpacking as Marie Kondoing your life.
that's a, that's a good way to put it. And I think you do it with some sense of, it's not just like with retirement. What are you leaving or what are you going from? The key question in unpacking is what are you going to? So if you're unpacking a drawer, for example, the condo model, what is it that you want that you're not having that this won't get you there? So, when you look at the three boxes in front of you with the drawer as a simple example, what what will get you what you want, what will not get you what you want, and what are you not sure of? And so you start to make these distinctions, which are very hard as human beings to make.
After we repack, what do we do?
Act. Number 6 is act. We choose I'm going to make a commitment here. It could be for a month, it could be for a year, it could be for a period of time, but I'm going to commit to try this and to do this, not just think about this or talk about this. And I'm going to get out there and make this kind of a first step, not for the rest of my life uh, type of commitment. And so I think that choice, as Viktor Frankl said, say yes to life by acting. Purpose is a verb. Action, the key ingredient here, Gene, is that action precedes clarity. That's a big line. I mean, that is a huge line for me. It took me a long time to learn. It's not just about having a purpose. Action means acting purposefully leads to that felt sense, that sense of a purpose. So action by doing something that you're committed to. And, you can go back to connect and reflect and explore and look at this. It's not just this automatic um, way of being. It's a process. But I say this all the time, Gene, and that is the process works if you work the process. You can't just think through this. You got to act through this.
I've heard you use the phrase purpose and a paycheck. That and it makes sense to me, right? You can really only in many cases afford to do this if you've got the resources available to support you, particularly in retirement,
Yeah.
particularly if you've given up your lucrative day job or career, and maybe you're doing
Right.
something that earns some money, but maybe it's less money, or maybe you're working part-time instead of full-time, or maybe you're not working for pay at all. How do you sustain the practice of purpose through retirement? How do you afford that?
Well, hopefully you've had a good and have a good financial advisor that's helped you to create that kind of a construct or that kind of a reality. But the question always is how much is enough? How are you going to figure this out? And so Chris Farrell, NPR financial correspondent, longtime colleague of mine, friend of yours as well, and he wrote the book Purpose and a Paycheck, and he said, don't start with the paycheck, start with the purpose. Create a fundamental picture, a narrative of who you are and what it is you want. And it may not work out the way you want it financially, but if you are saying, well, if I just do this and then someday I'll retire and do what I really want to do, he said that's the old narrative. The old life phase that I grew up with, my father, who worked for the same organization for 40 years, retired and died 2 years later. He had enough money. He was, I thought, healthy, and he died. And his thing was that he couldn't wait to retire.
Mm.
And when he retired, however, he had spent so much of his most precious currency, his time, doing things that were really not exactly who or what he wanted to be or do. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't exact. So I think we have to weigh out with purpose and a paycheck. With purpose is that time is our most precious currency. How are we spending our time? And will it get us? So I coach people all the time who say, this is great, but I don't have enough money to do this. And I went, let's figure out how you can revisit this and get your financial planner involved in figuring out, is there a way?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. I had a conversation with my husband this week about a friend of his who had sat down with his financial advisor just this week, and now have decided, they've got the money. They can stop working these jobs, and they've got a lot of activities in the community where they're more meaningful to them, right? That's
Right.
where they want to spend their time. And they sat down with the financial advisor to figure out if they could afford it. I think the question that we deal with often on this show is, can you afford to do it in a sustainable way, right?
Yeah.
And that's where having a guaranteed income in retirement comes in. That's where knowing
Yeah.
that your fixed expenses are going to be covered with an
Yeah.
annuity, with a pension, with a combination of those things, and Social Security, as well as some money spilling out of your retirement account. You
Right.
don't want to have to worry that that's not going to be there when you hit your
Right.
80s, 90s, and beyond.
And I agree with all of that. And the question is, money for the sake of what? Not just survival, but what is it you really want? And what are some things you can unpack, perhaps, to get to the point where you want to get to with the clock ticking. I'm often, in this new book that I have out, Who Do You Want to Be When You Grow Old? It starts out with the long conversation, which is what we're having, but it ends with the last part of the book is the ultimate conversation. It's about dying.
Mm.
And so when people say, "Oh, it's so morbid," and I said, "Not morbid at all. It's a reality check on who you are and what do you want." And the key question basically is at the end of life, will I earn a passing grade? Will I do my life, or have I done a default life and lived somebody else's life? I've interviewed so many people over the age of 65 over the last 50 years. I've made not a hobby, a vocation, Gene, out of interviewing people who are 65 and older. And I've written about this extensively, and I've talked about this, but I'll just mention it here because it's important. When people say, when I ask them if they could live their life over again, I'm talking about thousands of people here, not 10 people. They'll say, I wish I would have been more reflective. I wish I would have looked at what I really wanted and made some of these choices. But you can do that at any age. Secondly, they'll say, I wish I would have taken more risks. And the risks were not necessarily financial, moonshot risks. They were risks around relationships and work. I wish I would have spent my precious currency, my time, on what really matters, which are my relationships and the work I love to do, which is, I push on this thing, at the end of life, I wish I would have spent less time at the office. That's not true for a lot of us. A
Right.
lot of us, our work is very relevant to who we are and what we love to do. So it's maybe for some people that's the case. So reflection with these older adults, if you could live your life over. And the second is risk. And the third is the courage to make those choices. And the third is they want their life to matter. 100%, no exceptions. Human beings in their DNA want their life to matter. And that can come in a lot of different ways. But retirement, or what we call retirement, or this new phase of life, these new decades, which may be more years than you worked in many ways, you want your life to matter there too, just as much.
Tell us where we can find this new book, Richard.
Well, it's available Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc. I've done. I think I shared this with you. I've done 75 plus interviews around the world. What we're talking about here is not just a boomer phenomenon, or a retirement, I should say, phenomenon. We're talking about people around the globe who are aging and who are getting older but growing. If they're not growing, they're dying, and they know that. And so no one can claim, including me, can claim expertise in aging. I'm aging, you're aging, and this is new territory as we age into these new years that we haven't had the privilege of. Aging is not a disease.
No.
It's a privilege. And if we get older, and hopefully we have the money to sustain us, and hopefully we have the health to sustain us, but we also need the third M: money, medicine, and meaning. We need meaning to sustain us as well. And Becca Levy at Yale just came out with a new study. It's called a new book called Breaking the Age Code, where she has done massive research that people who have meaning and purpose live 7.5 years longer minimally. Now, if you could promise your listeners and viewers 7.5 years, you'd be promising them, now you need enough money, you need health, but you also need a reason to get up in the morning. That's what we're talking about here.
So let's very quickly, Richard, before we wrap this up for everybody, and Wanda says lots of inspiring words here. Thanks for listening, Wanda. We hope that you're going to take your way through these steps, through these practices. So stop me if I miss any of them, Richard, but we are going to reflect. We're going to connect. We are going to explore. We are going to
choose.
We're going to choose. We're going to repack, and we're going to act. And try it, everybody. Go ahead, give it a shot. Let us know how it goes. Again, you can reach both of us at social media. On social media, I'm at Jean Chatzky just about everywhere. Richard, how do people get you?
Richard Leider at .com.
RichardLeider.com. Let us know if you want to talk about how it goes. We will bring Richard back, and we will do this again. Richard, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for doing this with me today.
It is a big privilege for me to be with you, Jean, and thank you so much. I so admire your work.
Oh, well, thank you. Right back at you. And for more information on this discussion, for more information on the work that we're doing at the Alliance for Lifetime Income, please go to protectedincome.org/Leider. We'll see you next time.